Tonight, I've prepared a selection of captivating stories about enigmatic creatures. Now, make yourself comfortable and let the darkness envelop us. In the sweltering summer night darkness, on my way to visit relatives in South Carolina, I was quickly haunted by tales of hitchhikers. Yet, I hardly worried about such urban legends. Night driving was my delight, with roads deserted, allowing me to enjoy the journey without any constraints. But that night, my calm was shattered. It all began with our stop at a gas station around 3 a.m. I stopped to grab a hot coffee to keep my girlfriend awake. But as I sipped on my drink, I noticed something odd in the distance. A lone figure by the roadside in the dim light. Approaching, I made out it was a hitchhiker, tall and thin, with brown hair. But it was his eyes that struck me, two lifeless black pits. This thing wasn't a man, but a deer standing on its hind legs, resembling a human being. I had never seen such a terrifying creature in all my life, and the worst part was it was staring right back at me as I passed by. Shocked and horrified, it took me a moment to realize I had to get as far away from this demonic entity as possible. I hurried back on the road, driving at breakneck speed. After a few kilometers, I finally reached a large gas station. But the encounter had been so traumatizing that I had a violent nervous breakdown, sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't come to terms with what I had seen, and I knew it wasn't an illusion. My girlfriend tried to comfort me, but even she doubted my story. Yet that night, I learned about the full moon, and every time a blue moon showed, I relived the same nightmare. I would wake up screaming, shivering with fear, and remembering those lifeless eyes. My girlfriend mocked me, thinking I had made up the story. But for me, it was an undeniable reality. I had encountered something inhuman that night, and it will haunt me forever. It was a stifling and monotonous summer evening as I traversed the desolate lands from Ohio to California for hours, fatigue beginning to grip me. I knew I needed to stop for rest, but I pushed my limits to cover as much distance as possible before halting. Finally, I decided to take a break at a rest area in Flagstaff, Arizona. I set up my makeshift camp in my car, as I often did on my long solo journeys. The next morning, I woke up at dawn and hit the road again. It was around 4 a.m. California time, and I was crossing the scorching Mojave Desert between Needles and Barstow. Not a single car in sight, just me and the road stretching out to infinity ahead of me. And then I saw it. An immense creature, almost as tall as me, crossing the road right in front of me. I screamed to brake, but it had already vanished to the other side of the road. I was left paralyzed, my eyes desperately trying to make sense of what I had just seen. It was so unreal. I could have almost believed I was losing my mind. But I knew what I had seen was real. I looked around me, desperately seeking confirmation that I wasn't dreaming or going mad. But the desert was calm, with no sign of life, except for me. Back on the road, I couldn't help but ponder over that supernatural encounter. I wondered if what I had seen was real, or just a hallucination. A gigantic wolf of an unsettling gray color standing on its hind legs. A werewolf, perhaps? But I wasn't one to believe in legends and superstitions. Since that day, I have never forgotten that strange experience. And every time I pass through that place, I scan the road for a sign of that giant beast. But I've never seen anything like it again. A mystery that still haunts me today, a story I often recount to my friends during our long car escapades. But no one has ever seen anything similar in that area. Did I imagine that creature? Or does it truly exist? I'm still in search of answers even after all these years. It makes me think of the other strange and unexplainable phenomena I've encountered over my years of driving across the country. Deadly snowstorms, devastating tornadoes, suffocating dust storms that blanketed the sky. But nothing compares to that giant wolf I encountered that summer night in the Mojave Desert. I continue to wonder if anyone else has ever had the fortune or misfortune to encounter this mysterious creature. Perhaps I'm not alone in experiencing this. Maybe others hold this precious memory, just like me. One thing is certain, that encounter with the giant wolf will forever be etched in my memory. it awakened in me a fascination for the unexplainable and supernatural elements of this world. And I keep driving, in search of new fascinating stories and astonishing tales, in quest of new adventures and extraordinary encounters. For that is, after all, what makes life so exciting and mysterious. My Uncle Mark is a towering man, his features weathered by the sun and with piercing blue eyes. He's always been fascinated by indigenous cultures and their connection to the supernatural world. So when he got the opportunity to work on an Indian reservation in Arizona, he didn't hesitate for a moment. However, upon their arrival, Mark and his colleague Carl found themselves immersed in a tense and heavy atmosphere with the local inhabitants. Some appeared mistrustful and reluctant to let them settle on these sacred lands. But through their perseverance and respect for Native American culture, they eventually got permission to stay on the outskirts of the reservation in an old, run-down caravan. Their first night in this secluded place was tumultuous. Powerful shakes suddenly rattled the caravan, startling the two men awake. They heard menacing laughs and growls all around them, as if a horde of evil creatures was attacking them. Terrified, they took refuge under the table, praying for it to stop. After what felt like an eternity, calm finally returned. But their sleep was disturbed by this terrifying experience. The next morning, sharing their nightmarish night with the reservation's residents, Mark and Carl were met with a heavy silence and a warning: leave the reservation as soon as possible. But curious and intrigued, the two men chose to stay and uncover what had caused these supernatural events. The following night, the shakes resumed, along with strange noises and frightening visions. But this time, the locals refused to talk about it, as if they feared discussing a taboo subject. Frustrated, Mark and Carl continued to explore the area, disregarding the warnings and superstitions of the residents. It was during a visit to the local grocery store that Mark and Carl finally got a plausible explanation. Despite the owner's warnings, they learned about the Skinwalkers, ancient Native American witches who had made a pact with the devil to become malevolent entities. But skeptical, the two men preferred to put these stories aside, until that fateful night when they were confronted with reality. As they returned to their caravan after a long day of exploration, they were chased by three creatures resembling giant wolves, with glowing red eyes and almost human features. In panic, they ran for their lives, only owing their survival to the miraculous intervention of a violent wind that pushed the creatures away from them. This encounter left a deep trauma in Mark and Carl, who finally requested a transfer the next day. After that nightmarish night, they spent a year without incident, trying to forget that horrifying experience. But on a new trip into the reservation, Mark ran into his former colleague, accompanied by a new partner, Jimmy. Pressed for time, Jimmy forced them to stop to attend to an emergency. Despite Mark's warnings, Jimmy decided to proceed, ignoring the cautions and the dangers that lay ahead. That's when the creature appeared. A gargantuan werewolf-like form, accompanied by laughs and growls, chased them for miles, running at a supernatural speed. Eventually, they managed to escape, but the encounter forever marked their minds. Today, Mark shares this story with a hint of terror in his voice. The legend of the Skinwalkers remains an unresolved mystery, a frightening tale that continues to haunt those who've lived it and remind the more adventurous that some legends are indeed real.